Hi everyone, this is Britton here. I am back from the dead. Sorry I missed you guys the other day on Friday. I got pretty sick. Obviously I was sick on Wednesday and then it just got worse and worse and worse. I still have a cold. I've got a cough drop in my mouth, so if I'm talking a little bit weird, that is why. And I'm here tonight. I want to answer more of your questions. Most of the things that I think are important are in the book, so I really want to use this time to just answer your questions. Last week, during the live, Stevie Hart said, how would you evaluate a curriculum or consider if a certain program or curriculum is working for your kids? What kind of things do you look for to help us know? Maybe how can we evaluate different curriculums? And what would you say about Blue Manor Academy? Is it mostly complete as far as the class instruction portion goes? Okay, so I'm going to try to answer that question really quick. What should you look for in a curriculum? Well, it obviously depends on your kid's age. For younger kids, you're going to want a phonics curriculum. You're going to want Latin. I think Latin is huge, and I'm talking about the roots, like the suffixes, the root words, and the prefixes. That stuff's essential. So many times now, schools have kind of reverted to vocabulary lists or spelling lists, and they go word by word. And I talk about how ineffective this is in revealing school. And if kids would just learn how to decode the words when they're very young, like learning the Latin, the suffixes, the prefixes, the roots, they can dissect most words. So that's where you start, instead of going word by word. So like that's important. But there are a lot of great curriculums out there. Most of them are good. So I wanted to talk about tonight about what is often missing from curriculums. Like if you're looking for a curriculum, what are the things that are commonly done wrong? Okay, the first thing, and we don't talk about it a whole lot in this book, just we brushed off of it, but the next book is all about character. And character, like I said before, is the heart of an elite education. Most curriculums do not have a character curriculum or character books. They sometimes have some like niceness training books where, especially for preschool age, where they tell kids to kind of be nice and stuff like that. But those are not a robust character curriculum. A character curriculum shouldn't just be books either. It's very easy to teach a kid that he should be courageous. Like everybody intellectually accepts that and wants that. Every kid wants that. But being courageous is very different than knowing about being courageous or wanting to be courageous, knowing what courage is. And so a character curriculum is important, and it shouldn't just be books. It should be labors, almost like the Herculean labors, where he goes out. I think he had 10 or 12 labors to do. Obviously, not to that extreme, but jumping off of a high dive. I think that should be part of your character curriculum. It teaches kids courage, and they overcome the fear of heights and of water. And I really talk about that in the next book in more detail, but that's something that I would definitely look for. I think if you have a curriculum and it doesn't have character as one of the subjects, then that's a huge hole. That I think character is more important than the math and the reading and all that stuff. They're all important, but character is king. So that's one thing. Another thing a lot of curriculums lack, speech. And again, these are in the books that are coming in the Noble Way. The ability to speak powerfully is a superpower. We're only so strong. The strongest man in the world can maybe take on 3 or 4 regular men, and there are billions of people in the world. So our personal power is very small. Even our knowledge, the smartest guy in the world really only knows a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what could be known. And so the ability to organize people and inspire people and lead is super powerful. And we do that usually through money, through wealth. We can hire people. Or through speech, which is more powerful. It's by inspiring people, kind of getting our message out there. Speech it's like fundamental. It should be at least as important as math and reading and writing. At least as important. Speech is crucial. Your ability to speak is a superpower, and yet I don't see any curriculums with a heavy emphasis on speech. Sometimes they'll have a class, it's usually pretty weak, and it's usually in high school. It's kind of like an afterthought, or sometimes it's something we do extracurricularly, but it should be a core. Speaking is so important. Another thing, wealth. Your kids should know how to create wealth. They should understand the economy. They should understand markets. That should be fundamental, and it shouldn't start in high school. It should be an extra credit class. We start teaching our kids about wealth at 3, 4, 5 years old, and we're going to continue adding layers. Wealth is fundamental. It applies to every career. That's the same thing with speech. Speech applies to every career. And most curriculums don't have a wealth curriculum or a subject as part of there. So I'd say that is fundamental. And again, these are all things I hate to even bring up because this is like from the third book, but family. Family is probably the most important thing we need to know about, and most families in America are failing. I think the divorce rate is around 50%, and somebody pointed out that it's going down, but it's only going down because more and more people are shacking up, not because marriages are becoming more successful. So knowing how to run a family, manage a family, organize a family government, I think that's super important. I talk about that a ton in the book. I think it's one of the most overlooked skills. And you can't get it from other places. You have to read my book, because if you look at marriage kind of counseling or marriage books, it'll all be about communication and different things like that. That's totally irrelevant to a strong marriage. Communication is kind of important, but when two people are dating, they know how to communicate very well. Usually if communication is breaking down, there are other issues. So family is important. Etiquette. I'm surprised how many curriculums just totally ignore etiquette. Etiquette is super powerful. We think of like manners. You're judged on the way you present yourself, the way you carry yourself, on your manners. That is part of it. You can offend a lot of people just by not knowing the proper way to handle certain situations, stuff like that. So I'm surprised how etiquette has kind of gone out the window. But these were all things that were fundamental to an elite education a few years ago. Manners, etiquette, oratory, oration, speech. That was like the fundamental highest skill you could have in ancient Greece, and even through most of history until recently. Now it's not even part of the curriculum. So I would say that. The next thing is accurate, and I don't want to get into this too much today. I talk about this later in my book. I talk about it a little bit in Revealing School. I say almost all of history that we're learning is socialist fables, and I don't just mean in the public schools. I mean, when I go to homeschool conventions and I look at the curriculum they're presenting, it's mostly propaganda. They don't even know it. It'll be Christian homeschool conventions, and they're doing the best that they can, but they're presenting a narrative that was presented to them. It's been accepted, and it's just not true. And I don't want to get into it tonight because sometimes it can be a little bit controversial, but it's absolutely not true. And I'll prove it to you sometime. I'll just walk you through it. And I think, how can you possibly, why even study history if you're not going to study an accurate version? How can you learn from history if you're learning myths? Anyway, so an accurate curriculum, history curriculum is really important. I'll talk about how you can find that later, but that's one thing that I would look for. One of the principles of a great curriculum, I think, is less is more. If you look at some of our books, especially like in preschool and stuff, we introduce big topics, but we do it very minimalistically. I'm having trouble talking tonight. Sorry, guys. In other words, like, we have a history book, and a lot of times you'll see history of a book, even for preschool, and it's this thick. My camera's backwards tonight. It's this thick. It's got all these different details. It talks about what the people were wearing and where they slept and just all these irrelevant fun facts. It's got way too much. So what we do is at Blue Manor, we try to boil everything down into just the most fundamental, the most essential nuggets, and then we start adding layers. Which means we can cover all of history in preschool. We cover all of U.S. history, let's say. Actually, we cover all of world history in preschool. It's in a single book that a kid can read in 15, 20 minutes. And it talks about the Empire of Rome, but it gives you like 2 sentences. So it introduces a concept. The kid's actually like picking something up. He's not being overwhelmed, but then he can flow through all of history, get a broad picture, and then we go back and we start adding the next layer. We continually repeat itself so that kids are never forgetting the material because they're constantly reviewing it, but they're never overwhelmed because each layer is actually really, really thin. I think that's huge. So many curriculums, they teach you in blocks. So one year you get U.S. history and it's just a huge block and your kid is just totally overwhelmed. There's so much more than they can understand and process. They get through it. They've learned a ton by the end, but then that block is checked and it goes away. U.S. history goes away, and they go on to, I don't know, Greek history or something. And then time goes on, and they just totally forget everything that they've learned. So that is a block curriculum. I think it's super ineffective, and we should be looking for curriculums that teach in layers. Okay, so much of homeschool curriculum is propaganda. First, it is just busy work to justify the cost. Homeschooling has become a huge market. Okay, yes. Thank you, Jennifer. That is so true. And even us, we've had pressure because we wanted to come out with, let's say, a math curriculum, but we're so minimalist. We want kids to just know just what they need to know. They don't need to know a ton more unless they want to go into a field that requires more. And that's why our kids learn more by learning less. So in other words, they, instead of learning wide, they learn narrow, but then we can go a little bit deeper with it. But there's been times where we've had pressure. We're like, we can't put this book out this way. It'll never sell. It's too thin. There's not enough to it. And so you have this pressure to kind of fill it. And sometimes we think more is more. So if I get a thicker book, people will see more value in it. And sadly, that is probably true, but it's not as effective. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm reading another question. They're getting marketed to. Yeah, so it's become a huge market, and there's always, it's kind of like a gimmick. Everybody's trying to come out with something new and improved, and like textbooks are a great example. You have the classics. The classics are free. They're in the public domain. Anybody can access them. So a lot of companies say, okay, well, how can we make the classics better, that we can profit off of it? We can copyright it, so it's our own book. Well, we're going to add all these commentaries to it, and we're going to do all these plot stuff, and they fill it with all this fluff that's not necessary to justify their copyright, so that you don't just go read it. Well, at Blue Manor, we have all of those books, and we just keep them to the essential, just the public domain version. You can get it other places, but we really believe in being efficient with our education. So, okay, let's see. So, less is more. That was something that my dad taught me too. He's like, if you want to really learn something, he's like, I think it was like the centimeter rule. I don't remember, but he's like, get a thin book first, and that'll give you your first layer. And then if you need more, you can go in depth. But if you start with the thick book, you're never going to get through it. You're going to get bogged down, and you're going to be overwhelmed. So that's important. Okay. We talked last week too. There were some questions about what to do with older kids who are starting out. I would say all of the things that I said, like speech is super important. If your kid is 15, he hasn't started speech, he just needs to go back to the beginning and start mastering speech right away. Like when my kids graduate, and I don't even want to say graduate because they never will. Like, we don't see it that way. We see education as beginning when they're young, and they just grows through the rest of their life. They're never going to check the block and say, okay, I'm a great speaker, I move on. Like, you can always improve what you're doing, and speaking is powerful. But the point is if you're 15, you should go back immediately and start mastering public speaking. Get into Toastmasters, or just get familiar with great speeches. Start giving them in your home or presentations. Get very comfortable speaking and become a powerful speaker. That goes at any age. That's something you master, so you start it and you'll continue to practice the rest of your life. Start learning about wealth creation. I think that's so important. So if my kid was older, I wouldn't be worried about the algebra and all that stuff. I'd be like, hey, do you know how to make money? Do you know how to invest money? Do you understand markets? Family, some of these people are going to be getting married soon. Do you understand what it means to be a husband or a wife in the roles? Do you understand how to pay bills? Do you understand how to manage your home and govern your kids? Those are important. But then I would say start focusing on a career. And I talk about this in the book. You don't get paid for how wide you know or how much you know. You get paid for what other people don't know and how deep you know it. So if you take a little math or art here, and then you do a little bit of mechanics here, and you're just kind of getting this variety of different skills, those will never pay anything. But if you can start narrowing in what your kid is passionate about, it doesn't matter if it's mechanics or it's welding or he wants to be a lawyer or whatever. If you start figuring out the direction he wants to go, then you can start developing a specific curriculum to give him a head start in that. All of the highest paying jobs require mastery, and mastery takes about 10 to maybe 15 years to become, a competent master that somebody's going to actually hire to do more than the entry level work. It doesn't matter when you start, it's going to take 10 to 15 years. So if you started mastering carpentry at 5 years old, when you're 20, you could be a master carpenter. You have phenomenal work you'd be creating. But if you start at 20 or 25 after college, you're not going to be a master until you're in your 40s. And then you're going to have a job to pay the bills. You don't have that freedom to really pursue mastery like you would have if you'd started when you were younger. So like my boy, he's really interested in building and architecture. He says he wants to build homes or buildings. So already part of his custom tailored curriculum is to go out and he works with grandpa and he's learning about just how to cut different angles and fit things together, and he's going to be making a chicken coop and he's helping put in a floor, and so he's starting to learn those skills at 7 years old. So imagine where he's going to be in 13 years. He will have mastered, building and architecture and stuff like that. So with older kids, I wouldn't necessarily scramble for all the other academic things that we think of with school. I'd start to really focus in on, okay, is he a powerful speaker? Does he understand wealth? Does he have a career path in mind? And is he starting to master the skills that will be required in that career path? Okay, does anybody have any other questions? I hope that helps a little bit more. I'm still a little sick and under the weather, so I'm trying. Any other questions? Okay, yeah. Jennifer had said this, I think, before, but that, there is a market. Homeschooling is a market, and so there are going to be people who are telling you, hey, you need this is essential and stuff like that. You don't have to listen to all that. I don't know that there's a perfect curriculum, but you as a parent should feel empowered to start picking and choosing. I mean, in some states, there's requirements still. I totally disagree with that. Who is the state to tell us what the kids should know? They've done such a bad job with the public school system. Who are they to tell us? But you may have to meet some minimum standards, and so I would look into that for your state. But start feeling empowered to start creating your own curriculum. You don't need somebody else to tell you or lay it out for you. It makes it easier that way. But there's no way to mass produce greatness, which is what we talk about in the book. There's no way to mass produce that. Greatness is always custom tailored. And so as the homeschooling parent, it's really your job. You're like an artist to piece this thing together in a way that best suits your kid, fits your kid. Are any of the older kid books available in print? Because most of the classics are in print, obviously. They're public domain. There are tons of people who have printed them. You could also just read them online for free or download them for free because they're public domain texts. So like The Wealth of Nations, I mean, that's an excellent book that talks about economics. It's like the classic. It's the best book you could read on economics and stuff like that instead of getting a textbook. And that's free. It's in the public domain. I'm sure you can buy it anywhere. At some point, we probably will start producing the classics, like printing them and kind of designing them and laying them out the way that we would like to for Blue Manor. But those are already available in the public domain, so it's not something that we've done. As far as our own textbooks for the older age, we haven't gotten there yet to print. We're still trying to figure out how to organize it. We hate to do it by grade because when people come in, because we're so unorthodox in our approach, when people come in and say, oh, I need a 6th grade math book, well, ours is so advanced, let's say, that maybe it doesn't line up with what their concept of a 6th grade math book is. So eventually we will be putting them into print, but it'll probably be like 1st grade through 6th grade. So it'll just be one textbook with all of that stuff in there. Okay, so if you were looking at our store, yeah, most of our print books are for kids because those have the most value for us. Those are the ones that I've personally written or illustrated. And so the public domain books, there's just so many options out there. It's almost like, do we need to put that out there? We probably will to have a complete compact set someday, but it hasn't been at the top of the priority just because there's not a lot we can add to it, and every big publishing company in the world has produced the classics already. If there's no other questions, I'm going to get going. I'm still sick a little bit. I will be back Friday, and if you have any other questions, just leave them in the comments below. In the next week or so, I'm going to be talking about motivation. I realize there's a huge need for motivation training. A lot of parents are really burned out. I think that's, from what I'm seeing, that's probably the most pressing need right now. People have great curriculums, they have great ideas, maybe they're motivated, but they're having trouble getting their kids on board. Their kids are getting burned out, their kids are just kind of uninspired, and so it's making homeschooling very painful. And so I'm going to address that. I think my approach to motivation is great. If you've read it in the book, it's very good. This past weekend, I actually gave part of my speech on it, something new that's not in the book. It was going to be in the book, but it didn't get there in time. We'll probably put it in a later version of the book. But it's absolutely essential. I really wish it was in the book. But it's how to turn your education into a primary motivator. So like a lot of parents will say, oh, I motivate my kids to do his math by letting him play an hour of video games if he does an hour of math. Well, that's okay. It's a reward system, but the kid's really just motivated to play video games. You haven't turned math into the primary motivator. And so actually, I got a great response from the speech this weekend, and a lot of people are like, oh, wow, like, yeah, that's great. That makes sense. So I'll probably be doing that in the next week or so, and then on Friday, I'll just answer more questions. So, all right, guys, thank you so much. I'm healing up here, and I will be back on Friday. Thank you. Talk to you later.